I'm back.
Yeah, you are.
Dude, we got slammed, dude, with the
monkey.
With the pestilence.
Oh, yeah, pestilence. The pestilence of the beehole.
What?
Not this time.
No?
No.
Oh, I misread your text.
That's all right. Yeah.
Is that why you asked if you wanted a colon detox?
He just is fixated on that part of the body, apparently. And no, it was a respiratory thing. But I understand why your mind went to the butt. So, yeah, it's okay.
It is what it is, you know?
Yeah. I don't judge. We're inclusive.
I have penis on the mind.
Wait, what?
So
that's between you two. I don't know what to say about that.
Did you listen to the solo episode?
I did.
Okay. Anything to add? First of all,
besides it was cringy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did I nail it? What your recommendation for instructionals was?
It was pretty close.
Pretty close?
Yeah.
Come on.
No, it was good.
I feel like it was pretty good.
It was good. You did a good job on that.
Do you have any to add? And then on top of that, what about the question about strategies to use instructionals? So that was the big thing, was like, okay, I'm watching them, but how do you recommend?
Man, right. And you covered it already, but just my 2 cents on that is, you can get option paralysis, basically. You can look at a bunch of things and then all of a sudden like, oh gosh, shoot, what should I practice?
Yeah.
And you've said this many times before, really drill down shrink it down to something like, for instance, right now I'm working on a very specific guard passing sequence to deal with a bunch of different guards, but it's the same type of guard pass. Okay. So, and I'm going to stick to that probably for a month or two. And I'm using some various instructionals to get some ideas to kind of get almost like a consensus of, first of all, there's probably some consensus things that are probably, no matter what instructionals you look at for this specific, guard pass, there's probably some consensus things on these are just generally good ideas, mechanics or whatever. Then there's little details that you'll pick up from various ones, right? But I'll try to consolidate them and try to see what works best for me, because what works for some people may not work for. Yeah, and so that's how I use instructionals in general, but it's very directed. Otherwise, it's just like, oh my gosh, you're not going to watch an 8-hour instructional. Yeah. I'll watch 30 minutes, rewatch it, and then try to implement.
Rewatch.
What did I do wrong? Okay, let me go back and do it again until it's part of my motor system.
Yeah.
Right. And then figure out, okay, why did that fail? Like if I try to do it, and then I'm going to try to pick apart and reverse engineer what was it about that person I was training with. Why did that fail for me? Right. And so I think that's the best way to use things in general. And they're very valuable because in having a lot of instructionals isn't necessarily bad. It can be. But as long as you're using it like a library, like if I'm doing a research project in high school on a certain battle in the Revolutionary War or something, I'm making it up. Yeah. You can find a bunch of sources for that specific subject. Right. And they may have a little slightly different takes or references on there, but you're still very directed. So that's kind of what I like to do.
And if you struggle, remember, because sometimes it can be hard to remember how a roll went. Just like remembering, why didn't that work? That's where recording your rolls can come in pretty good handy.
Sure, as long as you have consent of your...
Yeah, I mean, definitely ask a partner.
Yeah,
whoever you're gonna roll with.
Okay, don't just so I can kind of, and don't put it up on YouTube without,
Or if you are, just tell them, be like, hey,
or hey, this is the plan, you know, and as long as they're down with stuff. But for your own just private use, I think would be very valuable.
Super valuable, yeah.
Because what you thought you might have done, you may not have. And
you didn't see something that they did. It's super important.
Yeah, I agree.
So we had quite a bit come in about a lot of health stuff from a guy that has some pretty outer range labs.
Yeah.
His blood work. And we're going to go over that and hopefully equip some people. And then we also had kind of a funky one where someone's been dealing with a quote unquote back injury. They've seen 3 doctors, 2 PTs. They just got an MRI. We got the MRI results, and they said we can talk about it.
And I actually looked at them.
And then you were able to actually just do a quick assessment, and it was pretty evident what was going on.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that as well.
And we'll talk about the pitfalls, probably what happened and why he got so many kind of misdiagnoses and things
What you
like
say,
that.
the mechanism of injury.
Yeah,
right?
we'll talk all about that. It's super important.
And then we're going to finish up with a magnesium supplementation and carb cycling question.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Hey, and just so everyone's listening, you're like, this is a health jiu-jitsu podcast, and some of the times we talk about things like, well, what does cholesterol have to do with my jiu-jitsu, right? But it's for your health, man.
Yeah.
And, you can get led the wrong way. So let's say you're prescribed a drug you may not need. They actually can have, side effects of muscle pain and, you know what I mean?
For sure.
So, the more you can understand about what's going on under your own hood, it will help your performance too and longevity. So, those of you that aren't super into this, that's what we're kind of doing here. So
yeah, and that's kind of a big part of why we even started this podcast was to equip people. Obviously there's a grappling piece, but health, wellness, and just equip people that have been steered down the wrong way because unfortunately the medical.
As I've ranted about many times, incentives don't align with health. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So anyway, So you want to kind of
I'd love to
give
start
me a little background on this one?
Yeah, I would love to start with the blood work.
Okay.
So this is, I believe he's 34, 35. He has an Indonesian, Micronesian descent.
Okay.
He is a little overweight. So he's about 210 pounds at 5'9".
Okay.
But he has a very active job, so he gets at least 10,000 steps in a day.
Right.
He does a little bit of light zone 2 cardio.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Throughout the week,
Cool.
once or twice a week.
Okay.
And yeah, he went to the doctor, got his normal blood work, and there was some things that the doctor said are quite concerning. And we got those labs.
Okay.
So I figure you can kind of run down what looks concerning and...
So, yeah, and I'm looking at, there's some missing things on here I would have liked to see where it was cut off at the top. I'm assuming this should be a fasting lab. If it's not, everything's out the window.
So they told him it does not need to be a fasting lab. And
that's preposterous for this.
I got up on his ass about that.
Well, it absolutely needs to be a fasting lab.
This was at about 2:00 in the afternoon.
Okay.
And yeah.
So say what I'm going to say with a grain of salt, although it's so dumb.
Yeah.
Okay. Whoever told him that this is my point anymore. It's almost like I feel like I'm ranting. I'm like, I don't know what's going on in medicine anymore. People, I don't think if they don't just care, they don't know.
Right.
I don't understand this advice that's being given. So first of all, I can't see, I would want to know a little family history. Okay. Is there a family history of diabetes or any other kind of chronic diseases?
What kind of panel are we looking at here?
So what we're looking at, is a comprehensive metabolic panel, otherwise known as the CMP. It contains some stuff looking at the kidney function, liver function, very, very minimal on each. And there is also a little miniature lipid panel in here. What's cut off in here that I can't see is a fasting glucose. But if you said it's not fasting, this is kind of going to be an academic exercise here today because I don't know what's what. Because yeah, so especially when there's a lipid panel involved, with testing cholesterol, triglycerides, all that, it absolutely has to be fasting. Okay, so otherwise we're testing stuff in the blood that's probably from a meal,
right?
You know what I mean?
I asked him. He said he did have a small breakfast and lunch previous.
I bet, right? So anyway, so we could do this in one or two ways. We could treat this. Before I'd said anything definitive, and by the way, this is not medical advice. I'm just kind of using this as a informational tool. But before I could say anything solid on this, I'd need fasting blood work.
Yeah.
because otherwise I'm just speculating at this point, and who knows what the values actually are, especially when we're talking about the lipid panel and the triglycerides.
Can we, once again, this is just informational. Let's put under the assumption it was fasted.
Okay, fair enough. We can do that. So, again, I don't see a fasting blood sugar. A fasting blood sugar is not the best way to look at glycemic control. In other words, what your blood sugars look like on average. It'd probably been nice to get like a hemoglobin A1C where we could see about a 90-day average about what his blood sugars likely were.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the kidney and liver function look normal.
Can you maybe just run down quickly?
BUN and creatinine, blood urea nitrogen creatinine. That's a surrogate for kidney function. Blood urea nitrogen is how protein, when it's metabolized, one of the ways it gets nitrogen out of the body is through urea, and the nitrogen in urea is accounted for. Creatinine is a breakdown of creatine. It's a way to look at your kidneys should filter this stuff out appropriately. And when they're not, you start to get elevations in those values. But there's some caveats to all that too, depending on how much protein you're eating and all that. But anyway, there's also sodium, potassium, and chloride, all kind of, that stays very tightly controlled by the body and the kidneys. You don't want to get those out of whack at all.
That's more kidney function.
Yep. Yep. Total protein is a good marker to look at. People that are malnourished,
okay,
will start to lose that for long periods of time.
So if you were identifying someone that's having some symptoms that aren't good, and you see that,
well, if I saw someone that's extremely lean, maybe have an eating disorder, anorexic, or someone like that, you would see just a general their total body protein is probably very low. They're probably cannibalizing themselves.
So his might be really high.
It's not bad.
Because he's overeating like crazy.
No, that wouldn't reflect, because it's not protein. It's not dietary protein on the short. It's just because there's so much proteins in general, enzymes, carrier albumin, all these things that travel through the serum are general body proteins that are there all the time. Okay. And we have, when we start moving to the gallbladder and the liver, we're looking at bilirubin, alkaline phosphatase, AST and ALT. They're different measures of hepatic, which is liver function, and also indirectly you could probably see if there's some gallbladder issues if bilirubin's elevated, with bile secretion and things like that.
And he looks good on all these.
Yeah, that looks fine. Sometimes when people have like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, let's say they're just pounding the sodas for years, even young people, you'll start to have a small elevation in the liver enzymes, because you're starting to have fatty infiltration into the liver, which is disrupting the cellular structures of the hepatocytes, which then will chronically spill some enzyme into the bloodstream.
He does say he doesn't drink any soda, so I assume that's looking pretty good for him. Yeah,
that's fine. And then at the bottom here, we have total cholesterol, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, and then some calculated scores of LDL. It's not even a real one. They're calculated based on your total. So, and we did a whole podcast on this, number 9, I forgot which one it is, that really breaks it down.
And he actually went back and listened to that since he got these labs, and it scared him.
Well, if these were actually accurate, there's some things that are very worrisome to me.
How much could food influence those levels?
The triglycerides especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, could significantly.
To the point where, we're going to talk about what these numbers look like specifically, but and they look horrific on paper, but just having a lunch an hour before could.
Yeah, but I would probably speculate that they're probably elevated anyway based on the pattern I'm seeing. But it can, especially triglycerides, it can especially be off in a non-fasted state. So.
Just additional information. They didn't give me, I think it's like systolic is the top number, right?
For blood pressure?
Mm-hmm. Now, they said that they think it was white coat syndrome, but they said it was in the 140s. And is that possible to get that high?
It's not that high. Yeah, very easily.
Okay.
Very easily. Yeah, that's not that high, especially if you're nervous.
What's white coat?
Some people are nervous going to the doctor, and their sympathetic nervous system gets elevated just by being in the office, and so their blood pressure go up. It's like an exercise. If you took your blood pressure during exercise, it's significantly elevated.
I guess it's because I've just never seen mine up at that high. So I'm like,
yeah.
I assumed it was high.
Interesting. So we're at the triglycerides, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. What's his marker at?
319.
What does that mean to you?
Well, it's very high.
Okay.
And if this was, fasting, I'd be like, okay, dude, we need intervention time. So especially in that age group, because the quote unquote normal values are 150, right, or below.
Okay.
Okay. I with my patients when I'm doing lifestyle medicine, I don't like that. I want them under 100.
Interesting.
Okay.
Especially at his age group.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
So triglycerides typically in fasted state, I really, in absence of, you guys probably, if you go back and listen to our podcast on cholesterol, we talk a lot about the lipoprotein particle, the carriers, which we don't have any of that information on here.
Right.
But we can surmise that those LDL particles are probably the wrong size, probably the small ones, the dense ones, because we have elevated triglycerides in low HDL.
Okay.
So that's a ratio. We want that ratio to be opposite. We want a high HDL and a low triglycerides.
Okay.
And then we can kind of surmise and guess, even without actual testing the LDL particles, or even ApoB would be another good one to test for non-HDL particles carriers. And those of you that are like, what is he talking about? Go back and listen to that. It's a lot to just, it was a 2 hour, I don't know, it's a long episode.
Yeah. It breaks down cholesterol to like such a granular level that you'll be able to read these panels yourself, but then you'll, especially an expanded panel, which this one is not, but you'll have more understanding why LDL, just that basic number that we get told that eggs give us high cholesterol, that there's so much more to it. That this doesn't tell us much. There's no direct measurement of the carriers. Like an ApoB reading will tell us how many particles are there, pretty much, right? Or doing a NMR where you have small dense versus large buoyant carriers of cholesterol, which is the particle. But anyway, when you have triglycerides this high in LDL low, that's one of the criteria for metabolic syndrome. So you're not metabolically healthy. With LDL low or HDL?
HDL.
Okay.
Because HDL is low on this. LDL, they just calculated. There's a calculation that they didn't even measure it directly. And remember, they're not even measuring the particle. They're measuring they're trying to calculate the LDL the cholesterol associated with LDL.
Which is just ridiculous, it sounds like to me.
Yeah, well, it's not very helpful, and especially if you're trying to make clinical decisions on putting someone on a drug like a statin. So the biggest thing was most people that are not managing their triglycerides well, they're eating way too much starch and simple sugars. Sugar in general is toxic in the bloodstream. Your body has got to have a way to get it out of there. Okay, it can only tolerate a certain amount in the bloodstream at any one time. It becomes toxic. It starts making these things called advanced glycation end products, which are basically tagging different proteins with these pieces of sugar, so to speak. Those then become inflammatory. The body starts recognizing those things as bad and to do an inflammatory response. My point is, when you have a significant amount of starch or sugar, there has to be some place for it to go, i.e., let's say that I just did a real hard, intense anaerobic workout and I cleared out a bunch of my stored sugar in my muscle called glycogen. Now I have a bunch of now if I eat some sugar or starch after that, I have a place for that all to go and it gets out of the bloodstream. When that's not the case, and I just eat like this, let's say a lot of soda, fruit juice is a big problem. Bread, pasta.
When you said simple sugars,
those are kind of like the high fructose corn syrup. They aren't complex into a starch.
Okay.
Glucose, fructose.
What are some foods that would be a simple sugar?
Sugar itself, table sugar, right, is sucrose, which is a combination of fructose and sucrose. I mean, fructose and glucose made together in a little pair. High fructose corn syrup, which is a combination of fructose.
A lot of processed food.
Processed food have a bunch of that stuff in there, right?
Deep fried.
Well, that probably does too, but the frying is usually done in a seed oil, which has its own problems. Yeah. So it's a fat. It's a bad fat.
Which he also admitted
Right.
roughly every couple days he gets a Zell's chicken.
Yeah, so that stuff's inflammatory in general. So again, which also stops the body from processing sugar, and inflammation in the body makes you less insulin sensitive, which then you can't pull as much of that sugar into the cells as you need to. Anyway, so when you don't have a place for that stuff to go, and there's no way you can quote unquote burn it through just basic metabolic rate, your liver's got to do something with it. And what it will do, it will take the sugar, especially fructose, but both glucose and fructose, it will convert it into triglycerides, which are fats. And then it will shuttle those fats into fat cells for storage, right? And so when you have high levels of fasting triglycerides, your liver's trying to just deal with a high level of deal with sugar that's in the blood pretty much. This is grossly simplified, but in general. And that alone right there, those high triglycerides, are when I look at someone's lipid panel, that is the first thing I look at, honestly, is their triglycerides, because it tells me a ton about their metabolic health.
Interesting.
Right? So high triglycerides, low HDL, high blood pressure, and increased waist circumference, those are all part of what's called metabolic syndrome. We're heading towards diabetes and stuff like that with this, okay? And that's what I'd be concerned about with this person. So the biggest thing to do is, and I'm not saying go super low carb, but understand that.
So okay, go ahead.
Someone like this, now some people can eat whatever, a chocolate cake, and dispose of it well. It depends on your ethnicity, what your ancestry is like, what your ancestors ate and their lifestyle. And then all of a sudden you're put into a spot where you're as a mismatch between what your ancestors ate and what you're eating. And those people are even more prone to do this, where some people get away fine. But if you're already a little overweight, you're having blood work like this, guess what? You ain't one that's going to tolerate that kind of, high starch and sugar without having it timed correctly.
And a typical Indonesian traditional diet, or just what they eat a lot of time, is a lot of rice.
Yeah.
And then chicken. Like it's very common that they do that.
Well, modern.
Yes.
See, we have to talk about that too.
Yeah.
The modern dietary patterns have infiltrated a bunch of people. I'm not saying rice is bad, but right now with the inflammatory component right now, it's not the best thing to do for this person.
Probably a lot of portion control needs to happen.
Well, of carbohydrate.
Yes.
Of carbohydrate. They probably would do well when they're not training on more of a protein and fat type of diet.
Which, once again, the kind of training, self-admittingly, is low level,
which isn't clearing out which is not clearing out your muscle glycogen.
Like very light jog on the treadmill.
Yeah, that's not going to
maybe some basketball.
So things like HIIT protocols, sprints, things like that will clear out muscle glycogen.
What about not in a HIIT protocol, but lifting weights, some sort of strength training?
So it depends. You certainly will get some increased glucose sensitivity to that, which is great, because that will carry on for a couple days. But unless you're going to high amounts of sets to failure, you're not clearing out a whole bunch of it. It's that kind of sustained, sprint repeats, but very, very high intensity type of stuff where you're exceeding your body's ability to supply oxygen to its tissues. So thus it has to go into an anaerobic or without oxygen metabolism, which will exclusively burn glucose at that point. And inside the muscle, that's in the form of glycogen, which we have stored there for that very reason, to run away from predators and stuff like that, right? But most of us run around without ever emptying that muscle glycogen, and then all of a sudden then keep eating the whole bunch of rice and whatever. Rice is basically sugar. Rice is a bunch of glucose packed together in a starch, right?
So good.
Well, I know it does, but it's very, very quickly dissociated from its chains of glucose, which is starch, into its individual components. Starting in the mouth with amylase, with an enzyme in the mouth. It's already breaking down.
Interesting.
Okay, so rice has a very high, what's called glycemic index. In other words, it will create high amounts of blood sugar very quickly.
Would he benefit from, or someone benefit in this scenario, by doing their glucose tests.
Yep.
And seeing how, because you mentioned you can react a certain way to chocolate cake different than I can.
Absolutely. And seeing what those are looking
Is he
like.
just getting absolutely crushed? Does he handle this or that pretty well?
There's a lot of other things we'd look at. For if Carrie, if she had this person as a patient, she'd be doing fasting insulin levels to see how hard their pancreas has been working, basically. Because if their fasting insulin levels are high, it just means your body's already tried to compensate for a little bit of insulin resistance by pumping up the amount of insulin produced. So those are all warning flags. We're heading into a bad metabolic state, right? So a person like this, the best thing they could do is get very low carb, but then after training, like jiu-jitsu or something that's high intensity, that's when you add back in that's when you get your protein carb. And we talked about it a ton. It's that nutrient timing piece. And we've had a couple folks at the academy that have just shifted when they're doing stuff and dropped a whole bunch of fat
Tremendous
mass.
results, male and female.
Yeah. And so some people are like, well, I don't have a problem with it. Well, good for you. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. But people like this obviously do, right? And so there's so the biggest, because then if we were to do an intervention like that after 3 months, I would be shocked if those triglycerides didn't come down significantly, like into the low hundreds, right?
I mean, definitely in this exact scenario, we got to get a fasted.
Got to get it
lipid
fasted,
panel.
right? So, yeah, and so by making a decision about certainly not cholesterol medication, because we don't even know, first of all, we don't even know anything here.
Right.
Okay, secondly, we don't know what I would like to see an ApoB to see how many particles they have that are potentially.
That's a test you can request,
You
right?
can. Well, it's easy to do. Yeah, it's an easy test to do. You can even get the more high speed where they look at. Not only do they look at the numbers of particles, but then they'll break them down into you have this many small dense ones and this many quote unquote large buoyant ones, where the large ones are typically less atherogenic or less apt to get lodged in the arteries theoretically. But even large numbers of big ones, are not good either, right? So, but before you start putting someone on a statin or a drug like that, which, oh, by the way, in an athlete, that has significant side effects. Like, can have the muscle breakdown, especially in high level athletes. You can get people who have low level rhabdomyolysis and things like that, where we're actually, their enzymes are up there, what's called creatine kinase. One of your muscle enzymes will be popped up.
Wow.
Right. So these aren't without, and especially in a 35-year-old, I'd say, hey man, let's do some diet, let's do some intervention first instead of putting you on a damn drug.
Well, especially, we've talked about this study before that came out about statins and the amount of time it's adding to your full life cycle by being on them, and it was a day. Someone
for like a 5-year period.
And and so really, I know the drug companies will say the other, but really the only thing right now in either the state of research right now, I don't know if I trust anything anymore, which is I never thought I'd get to this spot, just because of the special interests and how drug companies are doing their quote unquote research. Right. But my point is, statins in general, if you are a male with already had a heart attack, there is some benefit to the statins, but a lot of people will argue it's not for their lipid lowering. Statins are what's called have a pleiotropic mechanism. In other words, it acts by many different mechanisms, and statins are actually an anti-inflammatory compound too. So a lot of time, some of the researchers have rightly pointed out it's likely due to reducing inflammation for these guys that have already had heart attacks as far as being beneficial.
Yeah, for that application.
It's the
prophylactic style application that it's like, you guys, nutrition change.
Yeah, man. And I can tell you this, we could turn this guy around in 6 months and just have probably a stellar
now
looking.
Let's do a scare tactic. He doesn't address anything.
We're heading towards diabetes.
What does that look like in 5 years?
It's worse. And if I could look at any of the other markers, in 5 years might even be just outright diabetic.
Wow.
Diabetes happens. It's not all of a sudden you get it. It is a process of insulin resistance that happens over time, sometimes up to 10 years. And then all of a sudden you'll be nudging into your fasting blood sugars are like 105, 110 pre-diabetic. Your hemoglobin A1Cs now are over 6, right? And so we're heading into that type of territory. But a lot of people just don't do any of these preventive things, and all of a sudden your doctor tells you, oh, you're diabetic now. Congratulations. You know what I mean? Now we got to put you on these medications. It's like, well, where were you 10 years ago when we saw some of the markers already starting to show we're heading in that direction?
Ignorant question. Once you're a diabetic, can you become not a diabetic?
Yep.
Okay.
Type 2?
I don't know.
Type 1, no.
That's when you're born with, right?
The type 1, your pancreatic beta cells have been destroyed.
They're the ones that have the thing connected to them, right? And then like pumps them.
They cannot produce insulin anymore because their autoimmune diseases destroyed their beta cells. Now, type 2s, especially when you catch it early enough, you absolutely can reverse it. You know, it doesn't mean, you know, it's basically it's like being an alcoholic. You can go into remission. Yeah. But you're so predisposed, if you start falling off the wagon, so to speak, again, you will go right back into it. Yeah, that's right. And
there's no pre-diabetic. It's just you go right back into it.
Well, yeah, pretty much. I mean, it depends, because when over time, diabetes is primarily an inflammatory disease anyway. It's a muscle wasting disease. It's a storage disease where we're just jamming our little fat cells full of fat, trying to stave off, trying to get that glucose out of the bloodstream, right? And that glucose slowly builds up. Then it forms these advanced glycation end products, which then there's this horrible inflammatory cascade that happens. And that's that's why diabetics start losing their vision. They have kidney failure. They start losing limbs because the blood vessels are affected that supply all these areas, even the nerves. You have diabetic neuropathy, where people start, I can't feel my feet anymore, and all of a sudden they start getting infections they're not healing from, because those little tiny blood vessels get affected first.
You hear that, buddy? You gotta lose a leg.
So diabetics have so much higher risk of heart attacks, stroke, cancer, the whole 9 yards, because of this fertile ground of inflammation. So this is a time to do a big intervention.
You said something about metabolic deficiency or
metabolic syndrome.
Yeah,
it's basically a way of saying, hey, you're not metabolically healthy. You're heading in that insulin resistance type of piece.
Okay,
and you can be there before you outright by diagnostic criteria actually have quote unquote diabetes with fasting blood sugars 126 or over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have an arbitrary cutoff of what is diabetes,
right?
But it's all on the road of metabolic disaster. Yeah.
So marching orders for our figurative person here.
What I would do with a person like this, I would a continuous blood glucose monitor.
Okay.
Or even just a regular old monitor.
Prick yourself.
Where you're going to test after meals, 1 and 2 hours afterwards, to see how you're disposing.
Once 1 hour, once 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And start journaling it.
And see what really kind of flips you up. It might be a certain thing, like, oh, well, this one isn't as bad, but this food, oh my gosh.
Which Olivia and I did this for a pretty long period of time. And she included me in it because she was just doing it for herself.
Yeah.
And we can speak to certain things you will not understand or think will affect you a certain way, and certain things won't affect you that you think would. And just between Olivia and I, we were affected drastically different, right? Where she couldn't eat small amounts of, I don't remember like what things caused you to spike heavily, but then myself, I could eat twice as much as her of the same thing, and I wouldn't even come close.
Well, that's my point.
To spiking. So
that's why this has to be individualized.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very important what works for your buddy or friend that may not. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's like I'll never play in the National Basketball Association.
Muggsy Bogues.
Well, yeah, but I don't have that athleticism. So.
Hey, man.
But you know what I'm saying? We all have things that we have that may be not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And
look at my hairline.
We have to understand that it's not an even playing field in certain things. Yeah. And so, but we can still manage these things.
Yeah.
But at 35 and around this age, this is the time to get on this big time.
Because it could get really...
And it gets harder and harder to reverse because even type 2 diabetics, with all that inflammation over time, you start doing damage to the pancreas anyway. And it's oxidative stress and inflammation. And then the pancreas will keep trying to pump more insulin out as much as it can. But you probably have noticed the worst thing that can happen to a type 2 is now they can't even sustain that anymore and they have to go on insulin. And that's circling the drain with type 2s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, where type 1 is dependent on insulin because they're not producing it.
Right.
A type 2 is producing way too much and they're still not being able to keep up. Maybe, until later stages, they may have pancreatic beta cell failure, right, where it's finally just been destroyed by inflammation, but it's not the same process.
Yeah.
But if you see a type 2 on insulin, that is they usually already have all those things like kidney failure, and the whole nine.
Their body's barely holding on.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, the intervention, very simply, I would take this person and say, look, we're going to do this, but we got to shift what you're eating and when you're eating it. Right.
Okay.
And we would get, kind of protein fat looking thing during non-training days. Post-training meal would be a little bit of starch, and then you'd see how much you actually need by doing the blood sugar testing.
Yeah, with the stuff that get it in, but the stuff that you can handle better.
Yeah, and we talked about this with Brittany, like on our first episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have the numbers of what your glucose should be under after 1 or 2 hours?
Yeah, so that's been debated. In general, what I like to see, no higher than 140 after an hour.
Okay.
And then under 120 at 2 hours.
Okay. Under 100.
So you're actually showing that you're clearing it.
Fasted glucose, what would you like to see?
Oh, fasted glucose, typically 70s or 80s.
Okay. So like when you wake up in the morning, if you want to know.
Yeah. But it's not, but sometimes you could have a bad night of sleep. And we've shown this where like 2 nights of bad sleep can actually put you into a temporary insulin resistant state and then bump your fasting glucose. That's why I think in hemoglobin A1C is more of an average over time.
We've seen that too, where we both, like we'd talk every morning about how'd you sleep. And then when we were doing those tests, it would reflect immediately.
It sure would. It's a cortisol response too. Yeah. Cortisol will liberate glucose from the liver and put it into the bloodstream.
So that's the nutritional marching orders, which is most important. Then there's working out.
Yeah. So if you're going to eat a starch and protein, especially the starch after your workout.
So we're talking about your rice, your carbs, that sort of stuff.
You got to earn that. And you got to earn that by depleting muscle glycogen. And zone 2 cardio ain't doing it.
Which zone 2 cardio is your light jog on the treadmill.
And which is not a bad thing to build up your aerobic base and to increase your mitochondria and all kinds of stuff. So it can be a part of the puzzle. But as far as your glucose management, you really need to have something more high intensity to kind of... You've seen me sometimes on the edge of the mats after rolling. I'm shaky. Yeah,
just on Saturday.
Low glucose.
It was just after situationals, I think, and
I was recovering from being sick too.
On top of that, so the nervous system was taxed. But that was 15 minutes maybe, or 10, 15 minutes post training, and you were still.
Yeah, I hadn't refed.
Yeah,
and I got some fruit. So what I did that day is I had a little bit of chicken and some fruit, and that I was good after that.
So. Good news, in my opinion, for someone that maybe they're only doing zone 2 kind of stuff, the jogging, the little bit of pickup game basketball and stuff like that, is sometimes it can be daunting to hear about HIIT training and all that sort of thing. The good thing is those workouts, you're not at the gym for 2 hours.
No.
HIIT training, this kind of training that empties that glycogen, is actually quite short. Yeah, it's a sprint.
The classic is the Tabata protocols, right? So
you can YouTube Tabata timer,
and literally the true Tabata protocol is 4 minutes. Yeah, done correctly, it's brutal.
Yeah, it's exactly there's like I said on YouTube, you can search Tabata timer, and there'll be different interval sections and stuff.
The 2010 is the classic Tabata, where 20 seconds of full on activity, 10 seconds of rest, 8 cycles.
And that's your 4 minutes.
That's your 4 minutes. Yeah.
And you can go to where literally when I've done these kind of kettlebell style HIIT training protocols or Tabatas, it's not more than 20 minutes.
No.
And that's and on that one, one of the differences between the 2010 that you just talked about is there's like maybe a minute rest or a 30-second rest.
Yeah, and you're hitting it a little differently, which is fine. You're not getting quite as anaerobic so quickly, but you're still pushing that zone. Whereas a Tabata, you're basically running away from a bear type of intensity.
Yeah.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be. You don't have to worry about being at the gym for an extra 45 minutes that you already are. It actually will probably be easier than you
but
imagine.
if you did 6 hard rounds in a row of jiu-jitsu, there's some anaerobic portion of that.
For sure.
If you're pushing it.
And with jiu-jitsu, you can really pick, is this going to be a lazy round or is this going to be
for
something
sure.
more intense?
And there's a time for both, but know what you're doing with emptying muscle glycogen as far as what you need to do.
Yeah.
It has to be anaerobic, period. You have to exceed your body's ability to deliver oxygen to the tissues. And really the only way to do that is a certain level of intensity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've told him we're going to need a report back.
Good.
He needs to make some of these changes. He's going to listen to this episode.
Okay.
He already listened to the cholesterol one, so and we've just been personally talking to him a little bit, giving him some direction on the nutritional side already. So we told him whether it's a month or 2 months, get your labs done again.
Yeah.
Let's check it out. Hopefully it's
you had fasting. Yeah. Because I would argue that the triglycerides, even in the 300s, are probably still artificially high because it wasn't fasting. But it's still probably high, if I had to guess.
Why do you think the doctor told him it doesn't have to be?
I don't know who. I don't understand anymore. I don't know. It's just dumb. If we know we're going to get a lipid profile or any kind of fasting, you want it fasting, period. Because otherwise, what are we doing? It's like, okay, well, here's your... I could probably make myself have crazy high triglycerides by taking it 30 minutes after a high-fat meal or something. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
would that affect the HDL?
Not so much.
Okay.
But anyway, so that's why I'm saying that I see a pattern there that is likely we're not on the right track.
So I'd love to change gears.
All right.
And get to the MRI for our lower back pain.
Yeah. Let's give a little history on this guy.
Yeah. So we have a 36-year-old active jiu-jitsu practitioner, wrestler, really good shape.
Yep.
Now he's dealt with, like I said, 3 doctors, multiple PTs. We actually just got him hooked up with a really good sports massage therapist, which we have locally, a black belt. One of the benefits of having, whether it's a massage therapist or a doctor that is actually a jiu-jitsu practitioner, is they understand what we put our bodies through.
That's right.
Because you always talk about the sagittal plane. Jiu-jitsu is the opposite.
Typically, right? So we're all over the place. Right?
Yes.
We're loading joints in weird positions, right?
Whether it's forced or not.
Well, and this really comes into play here with this specific injury. The knowledge of because so the bottom line is this guy had 10 months basically of this pain right around the sacrum and the lower parts of the right where the butthole is basically.
Okay, we're real low.
Yeah, but also radiating around, sometimes into the groin, sometimes into the hip.
And then up kind of to the top of the butt crack or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I see sacrum or coccyx.
That's right. The coccyx is just the little tail at the end of the sacrum.
What about the sacroiliac joint?
Okay, sacroiliac joint. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to read the MRI here. So
this MRI, they were looking at this guy's sacrum, and part of the time when you image the sacrum, you'll still get a little piece of the lumbar spine. The little bottom piece of it, because you're focused more on the tailbone, which is the sacrum.
Yeah.
But you'll still get a little bit of it. So they did comment on the lower levels of the lumbar spine too in here.
Let's touch on what they found, at least in their report on the MRI.
So basically no fracture, and they'll say stuff like no fracture or marrow edema. In other words, when you look at the sacrum or coccyx, you want to make sure that there's no evidence of inflammation. Kind of like, if you fell on your butt, like you were swinging on something, right? You'd have what's called quote unquote bone bruise. You'd be able to see some of that type of inflammation right at the level of the bone
That's
itself.
the marrow thing.
The marrow, no bone marrow edema. Like, so it's not like typically you'll see with a contusion like that, when you just directly hit something, you'll see a little bit of that. Okay. So none of that. And then say sacroiliac joints are normal in appearance, which they almost always are. Yeah, this is not a diagnostic.
What is a
sacroiliac joint? Is where the sacrum, part of the sacrum is the tailbone. Iliac, or the ilium, is the pelvis, where it's basically where the spine joins the pelvis. Okay, so where the lower extremity joins the spine. Okay, so you can think of, you have a hip joint. The hip joint is the femur, or the big bone of the leg, has a ball and socket joint into what's called the acetabulum, which is part of the pelvis. Okay. And then that pelvis is connected to the spine by the sacrum at what's called the sacroiliac joint, or SI joint. So it's a known spot. It's very prone to be stressed, especially if you fell on your butt, or if some kind of weird thing
I've heard
happened.
the SI joint.
SI joint's what it is. Sacroiliac joint.
Okay.
So they're almost, when you image them, unless you have some horrific automobile trauma or some high force impact, you'll never see a disruption of the sacroiliac joint. Even if that's where the problem is.
Got it.
Okay, so it won't show up. There was an incidental finding on this: disc bulging and posterior annular fissure at L5S1.
Which is? So
L5S1 is the disc between L5 vertebrae and S1, which is the top of the sacrum. So there's a
very
disc,
low.
It's the disc, the lowest lumbar disc. So the disc below the lowest lumbar vertebrae that's sandwiched between the tailbone and L5.
Okay, that's the last chain right there.
Right. And so guess what?
Well,
what?
If I can say, the initial understanding from this, at least in his perspective, is, I have a bulging disc in L5, S1. And he was like, that's my problem. I've dealt with this for 10 months.
Yep.
I've seen all these people. And one thing that's interesting is the pain isn't always there.
It's not.
It comes about in it appears to be random moments of physical exertion.
But I asked some more questions.
Yes, and I want you to talk about that too. But after reading this, because it says axial images demonstrate circumferential
disc bulging and annular fissure
at L5S1 immediately. When I read this too, I was like, oh yeah, dude, you just got a bulging disc.
No. Of course he does.
Yeah.
That's one of the most common places being on the planet. Disc bulges are common in almost everyone, especially as we age, we will have bulging discs. That's a problem being under gravity, right? It's only a problem when that bulges enough usually it's a lifting, there's these posterior disc herniations is when it's bulged so much that the annulus, which is the layered material around the jelly-like substance in a disc, has become stretched so much that it's lost its integrity, and the jelly stuff starts pushing through, almost like forming a little lump, which is, and then if it breaks through the annulus, that's called a herniation. When that's a problem is when that bulge is so large that it impacts the exiting nerve root from the spinal cord at that level. And your symptoms would be completely different then. At that level, you'll have pain all the way down, in this case, the back of the leg and probably the lateral part of, the back of the thigh and the lateral part of the leg, which is kind of the sciatic nerve distribution. That wasn't present. This is almost certainly what we call an incidental finding.
And because this MRI has something called the impression.
Well, the impression is just basically what's the bottom line of the MRI. And the radiologist will say, no fracture abnormality of the sacrum or coccyx is identified. Disc bulging with posterior annular fissure. And annular fissure just means at some point the annulus may be in, who knows, people will have these things as findings with no back pain. Okay. We've done studies on 100 people with zero back pain, and 2/3 of them will have these big disc bulges and fissure, all kinds of stuff, right? And there's not a good clinical correlation with that and back pain. It's called nonspecific low back pain. Well, I asked him more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. I said, this is almost certainly, given his symptoms even, it seems like an incidental finding. Okay.
Which, did we go over his symptoms completely?
Yeah. So, you know, I asked him, there wasn't a lot you gave me at first. And I asked him, okay, when is this worse? Oh, when I'm sitting. Right there. Okay. So and then the most important question, which I don't know if anybody's asked him, is what's the mechanism of injury? If he said, I was trying a max deadlift and then this is what happened to me, then the disc thing would make more sense. Right? Because that's how you pressurize the posterior part of the annulus based on, if you lost form and rounded your back, then you could have bulged the disc at that point, disrupted the posterior annulus, which, by the way, does have nerve fibers in it.
And that's going to be the weak point where all the pressure...
then it's healed at this point, right? So that had been one thing. And typically there would have probably been a more catastrophic thing where it would have herniated or something like that and causing lower extremity pain, right? But that's not the case with him. So when I asked him, he was playing guard on his back, supine, and had a big, I believe he said like a 250-pound MMA fighter.
Big fella,
loaded on his knee,
like
on
he
the
had
same
a knee
side.
Shield,
knee shield, kind of, but then he wasn't on his side anymore. Like traditionally, the knee shield, he was on his side, and the guy shifted over. Then he got flat on his back, with the knee loaded straight up in the air with this guy on the weight of the knee, and then internally rotated that hip.
So imagine for people, if I'm laying in kind of a supine position, so on my back's rounded, my left knee is going into a sternum, and then I start internally rotating my hip by my knee starts diving inward, my foot will then start going outward outside my hip, and then the knee starts coming inward.
Yeah, so he basically had a axial loaded on the hip, which he already had a whole bunch of force on this hip, and then it tried to internally rotate the hip itself. Well, first thing I did is check his hip mobility. And this isn't a dig on him. I see this a lot, but it was one of the worst I've seen. His internal rotation was non-existent in both hips.
He's a very athletic guy.
He's a beast, man, for sure. But this is what I'm talking about when you train the sagittal plane so much. And we're working on squats, deadlifts, stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. But we got to get this mobility. We've said so many times, you probably heard me before say, one of the biggest predictors of low back pain is poor hip mobility, because the low back isn't supposed to be super mobile. Okay.
Right.
The hips are. And when the hips, so what was happening in my mind, is that when he had all this load on his knee, pushing his whole, you can imagine driving the femur into the hip joint with 250 pounds on it, and then tried to internally rotate the hip doesn't have the mobility. So guess where that mobility had to come from? The connection of the pelvis to the spine, which is a sacroiliac joint. And it's kind of the classic symptomology he was having too. You can have this kind of groin-like pain in the front, or it can be very deep, almost right by the butt crack in the back.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that joint runs right all along the side of the tailbone, right?
I remember his first visit in. We were getting to know each other and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he said he's been healing from something. He had been off the mats for 8 months or something like that. And he's like, dude, I don't know what the hell it is. It feels like the bottom of my ass is like...
He was probably having some referred pain from that, right?
But it was so confusing to him because the pain area was so low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can have referred pain from this sacroiliac joint. All you got to do is look up referred pain SI joint, and you can see the pattern, the distribution from that.
And it was a big flag for you when when you asked him, do you have pain in your groin, right? That was like...
Yeah. I said, does it ever rotate in here? He says, yes, sometimes into the testicle and all that, right through the... And that absolutely can be referred. But more than anything, it was the mechanism.
Right.
So because there's... when you start having pain in that area, there's, you can go, okay, do I have a hernia? Do I have
prostate cancer?
Or unlikely, but whatever, all kinds of stuff. But
That's where my mind goes.
When you have zero symptoms before and you have this mechanism, and then, oh, by the way, when I check his mobility, there's almost, when I say zero, I mean, there was almost zero internal rotation.
Yeah, him do like 90-90 stretches.
Oh, yeah, and it was just brutal for him. Remember how bad your internal rotation was?
Yeah,
but it's gotten a lot better.
I mean, it's literally, I would say I have average internal hip rotation now.
But you were prone, one of the exercises I gave you, that one SI joint thing, was so good for you because that's where you were having your problems with your back, is because of your lack of, because you have excellent external rotation, but your internal rotation was lacking, which, you know, if you got into that situation loaded, it's going to stress that SI joint.
Which is interesting because let's say you have average to above average external rotation. I would say I have even better than that.
Yeah, I would say too.
And you're going to automatically assume I got great hips just because we use external more than internal, especially in a jiu-jitsu sense.
Yeah.
As in like when we're playing guard,
Oh,
that's
for
like
sure.
our standard position.
Yeah.
Or if you're someone, maybe you don't do jiu-jitsu, but you just sit crisscross applesauce, you can, you know, that sort of thing. You can go into lotus position.
Right.
So you're like, my hips are solid.
Until we check.
Exactly. Yeah. Go the other way, and you might find that you have a severe imbalance, which can then, as I had, started causing severe issues. And I was diligent when you guys, you know, showed me the 90-90 stretches to do the different kinds of 90-90 stretches, among other stretches. I would say just a couple months of being diligent, I was like, I'm at average internal rotation.
Well, and it's just that FRS principle of loading something now in a new area.
Yeah.
You have to tell the nervous system this is safe. If it's never been there, it doesn't know. And that's why people have mobility issues typically, is because they've never trained in these areas. They've trained sagittal plane or whatever they like.
Yeah.
and don't train what they need.
Yeah.
Right. And so by then strengthening, because the 90-90 is we're not just stretching. We're creating strength, isometric strength at these end ranges.
Yeah. In 90-90 is the position, but you were having me do stuff where I'm in a 90-90, I'm looking to
over
like
the
I'm
down
twisted,
leg.
and then I'm lifting like you lift it like a quarter of an inch, but you're trying.
Yeah,
you're finding the end range.
It's called pails and rails, is what we from the FRS folks, and it's been great, man. And so then you'll be a lot more you're not as predisposed to have these low back issues, and the same SI type of stretch, if you want to call it, that I gave you, I gave him too, with your foot up on a box and then dropping that bottom leg, and it works. It's relieving because it kind of puts a distraction on the joint. You know, it's relieving, but it's also, you know, building a little mobility too. Because
in your head, it makes no sense.
No.
You're doing it, you're like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And then the next day, you're like, I have relief.
But it only works if that's the problem.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, which could be the exact opposite of what you'd want to do if someone had something else going on. And that's why, you know, having someone that understands jiu-jitsu, being able to recreate a mechanism of injury when we're talking about anything with the pelvis or low back is crucial, because otherwise, what are we doing? Otherwise, we're looking at MRIs and just doctors like, well, I don't really, you know, they may not have the skill set to do that kind of, or understand
diagnosis
that evaluation. And then all of a sudden they just see something that is, they can say a point to, it must be this. Right. And when oftentimes it's not, you know, you start chasing lab values or start chasing imaging findings, it has to make sense.
Yeah.
You know, with the mechanism and what your exam looks like.
So I know you've talked to this fella about what the next steps are.
Well, and when I give someone something, I give them very minimal stuff. I'm not going to say, here's 10 exercises for you, right? Because I know when someone does that to me, I don't have time.
It's like an instructional.
So I want to give the most high yield stuff for someone to correct the biggest things that we see first. And then over time, we can start honing in on just kind of, you know, getting all the, you know, dotting the I's, crossing the T's type of thing.
Yeah.
Working into it. But that just shows you how, with low back pain, if someone says, well, what can I do? I get this all the time. What kind of exercises can I do? I don't know.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? You know what I mean? And so we have to go through the history, recreate the mechanism, and then look at where they're having symptoms in the exam, it all is a big picture, but 90% of it is coming from that mechanism, because that puts me on a certain course to try to tease out. Otherwise, it's a big black box. And like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And you could be giving someone the exact opposite of what they need.
Right.
Yeah. So that's just kind of the take-home message on that.
Good. Yeah, and that just the importance of finding quality practitioners, because once again, if you just go off a blank MRI, seen 3 doctors already, getting pointed at the wrong direction.
Well, we were into such a structural model of medicine now.
Yeah.
Where it must be, whatever we see on the MRI or X-rays, thus must be the problem. And oftentimes it's not. We're chasing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we'll move on.
Okay.
To the magnesium supplementation and carb cycling.
Okay.
So they haven't listened to all the episodes, but they're working their way through. This is a somewhat new listener. Number 1, I'm just going to read the question as it goes. They say, a few weeks ago, I tried magnesium supplementation. I was taking 125 milligrams of magnesium glycinate every day because I had heard that magnesium is very important for many systems, and most people are magnesium deficient, especially those who don't eat a ton of green vegetables. I eat some green vegetables nearly every day, but probably not enough. The only thing I noticed from my experiment was I was blowing out the bowel every morning. a couple times. This is unusual for me. I am normally a good pooper. I also started to lose a bit of weight at this time.
This was after starting magnesium?
Yes.
Okay.
This is, his little experiment. I started to lose a bit of weight at this time, which may or may not have been related to magnesium. After getting off the magnesium for about a week, my stool is starting to firm up. So I guess he had like the more like cow patty style stool. Started to firm up, and I've gained back a little bit of weight. But there's still some laxity in the old boiler room. So a little bit of Montezuma's revenge. Is this common? Does it mean I'm getting enough magnesium from my diet?
So, no, that's not what that means. So the bottom line, the reason why most of us are deficient is the soils are overfarmed anyway. And things that we would get our magnesium from, it's just not there like it used to be, because we get it, the plants get it from the soils anyway. They sequester these minerals. But it's a fairly low dose of magnesium glycinate. What I would recommend before we get crazy is try another chelate. In other words, there's magnesium glycinate, there's magnesium citrate, there's magnesium aspartate, magnesium threonate. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and it could be the brand. There could be some things in there that are wonky that who knows, right? I would get any supplement, always look for good manufacturing processes and also third-party testing to make sure what they say is in there is in there. If you're just going to Costco or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a diarrhea. Absolutely. Matter of fact, magnesium oxide is used to treat constipation, So of course, diarrhea is a very common
But
side
he is
effect.
on a low dose.
He's a pretty low dose, but
Liv, how much do we take every night? The 3 pills?
Probably close to 400.
yeah, I take 400 myself at night. That's what I'm saying. But I use a mixed chelate brand. So I use something that has a bunch of the different types of chelates.
Not
and
just
mixed together.
glycinate.
No, not just. You may just have a problem with that. And I would try a good reputable brand. Stay away from mag oxide for sure. That will definitely give you it's not absorbed well, and that's the whole reason why it works.
Oh, okay. That's why you would use that.
That's why you would use it. But I would look at there's some powders. One of the powders I use has a bunch of I think it has 5 different types, and that's what I use at night. Put it in water before I go to bed.
Chance.
Let me see. I can pull it up right now.
Yeah. So while he's
use.
looking that up, Olivia and I we take 400 of the glycinate. Liv, do you know what brand we take that?
ZHOU.
Yeah.
It has GMP.
So that's what we take. Sometimes we will take the other style magnesiums as well.
Yeah,
I haven't taken it.
So I use this thing called magnesium. magnesium complex supplement by Go Biotics. GOBIOTIX, of course. Let's see what all kinds of stuff this has in it. Yeah, and each scoop is 420 milligrams. It has magnesium malate, aspartate, glycinate, and citrate.
So you're getting quite a few of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you also got to look at, other ingredients in there. Is there something in there there's an allergen to you? Is there something in there as a gut irritant? Typically that low, but I mean, for sure, magnesium can cause diarrhea.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but before
could it be an adjustment period for them?
Well, but not typically with a dose that low.
Especially with how quote unquote severe he's.
Yeah, and it lasted for a long time. So that, to me, that makes me think it's not. There might have been something in there. There's a gut irritant. Because usually,
it's a pill form, maybe a carrier or something.
Well, who knows? Yeah. And because typically, if it was just the magnesium, once you stopped it within a day or two, you would be good to go
because it moves through.
Yeah. So
I'd be interested to hear back from you on once you do adjust. Maybe it's brand, maybe it's style of magnesium. Let us know how that works. Give it a couple weeks and. Let us know how you react on that.
Right. And I think starting out low is not, but just because you have diarrhea from it doesn't mean that your stores are good. I understand that question. They're like, oh, does that mean my body doesn't need it? Likely not.
Right.
Yeah. Likely that's not what that means.
Okay.
It means there's probably an irritant there that is, especially if you've had a week or so of something, even after you stopped it.
Yeah.
That's what I would guess too.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a really good question.
Awesome. So I definitely look to hear back from you on that.
Yeah.
So he has a second part of the question, which is more on the carb cycling or nutrient timing. And he asks, you have mentioned nutrient cycling, where you try to get most carbs after training and less carbs on rest days. I'm trying to gain weight, but I don't gain weight easily. I am starting to compete again, and I am in the bottom of my weight class, jiu-jitsu practitioner. And I would rather gain muscle to be at the top of my current weight class than lose it and be at the top of a lower weight class. Would you still recommend this carb cycling for someone like me who doesn't put on weight easily and is trying to bulk? He's 37 years old. He trains 3 days per week, and he lifts 1 to 2 days per week. So
the short answer is no, I would not recommend it.
The cycling.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, you need to eat. Yeah, I wouldn't be so worried. If you already have a hard time gaining, I'm assuming you're pretty lean. When I'm talking about carb, I'm talking about people that have a hard time getting lean.
Yeah.
Right, and obviously,
or you're on a weight loss journey or something,
right? Where we're already have some stuff going the wrong way metabolically, right?
As we talked about earlier,
right. I mean, I would be fat if I ate.
Yeah, same.
If I didn't eat the way I eat right now, so that works for me. But someone that is no, absolutely, do get some calories in. Yeah, support that. And
you might even train better too.
Yeah, for sure. So some people need that. Some people need higher carbohydrate, right? And they process it really well. And it shouldn't be a problem for them. Now, if it starts going south with their body composition, right, then okay, you're overdoing it. But, protein and carbohydrate together are pretty darn anabolic.
Yeah, and especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, so yes, go for it. Have a good time. You're going to notice maybe some more fuel in the fire a little bit, especially during those jiu-jitsu training days, the 3 days a week. If your body composition starts training, that doesn't mean you have to necessarily go back to only eating carbs after.
No.
Check out your portion control. Tone down the portion of the carb just a bit. Just mess with it, but you don't have to go full.
I would probably guess that especially if you're eating more high quality carbohydrate, like sweet potatoes and the yam thing,
butternut squash.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I mean, go to town, man. I mean, seriously, you're not going to, if you're one of those people, you're probably going to need to load up a bit, and you're probably going to make sure you need to get your protein to, all this stuff is hitting that anabolic growth switch, right? So yeah, for someone like that, I definitely don't recommend the carb cycling because it's just not. This isn't one size fits all.
Yeah, he's probably what's that body type that's net?
Ectomorph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah. So people are trying to put on muscle mass and all that. Yeah. Now, if you start getting, a little gut on you, then you're overdoing it.
Yeah.
As far as that goes.
He's got a pretty good training schedule too. 3 days a week of jiu-jitsu, 1 to 2 of lifting.
You look like remember Michael Phelps?
Yeah.
The swimmer.
Yeah. I know about this. Yeah.
You know what he was eating?
Yeah, 10,000 calories.
Preposterous. Well, because he needed it, right?
Because he
would waste away to nothing.
Yeah, he was losing pounds and pounds after swimming sessions.
Right, and plus maybe the way he's wired.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Mikey Musumeci. Mm-hmm. He does more of an intermittent fasting thing, but he's not shy on the carbohydrate, right? And plus, it's probably supporting the guy's training too. You know, gosh, training that much. So yeah, there's no. Yeah, for you, no. If you're trying to gain muscle mass, don't do this carb cycling thing. You don't need to. It's the folks that are like, gosh, I think I'm 20 pounds overweight. I got, some fat mass. If I lean down, I could get to a lower weight class without cutting water,
Right.
That's someone I'd put on a nutrient timing type of
which
thing.
is, we've talked about him before, a blue belt that we have that has gone through that journey. Now he's in the 70s when he was in the 90s, and it was just intermittent fasting, intermittent fasting and nutrient timing with his training schedule, and he got down to a natural body weight.
Where he feels good.
Yeah, so now he could do middleweight, which is 181.5 with the gi on.
That's right.
And he's just sitting
But that's
perfectly.
different. So if you're already lean, you're trying to actually gain and come up a little bit higher in your weight class.
Yeah.
Eat, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get after it.
Just try to make them as high quality as possible. Yes, chocolate cake is a carb.
Right.
So is a butternut squash, right?
Yeah.
But they're very different in nutrient density.
If I can recommend ground beef, how do you cook those butternut squash? Do you just roast them?
Oh man, it's so
With,
good.
Some like avocado oil and
You cut them in half, turn them upside down, and put them in the oven.
We chop them up, I think. Right?
Yeah.
She chops them
Dude,
up.
since we're talking about it, Carrie got some delicata squash. This is another type of squash. What she did is she took the squash, cut it in half, took all the seeds out, put them on a baking tray face down at 350, and made little bowls out of them.
Nice.
So then you just shove the meat into the squash and eat the whole thing like
when
a
you
bowl.
scoop a cantaloupe or something.
Dude, exactly. Oh, it's amazing. We just had it last night. It was so good.
The ground beef with the butternut squash, it tastes super good.
so good.
If you want to add a little something in there, go some avocado in there.
Oh yeah. So oh man, make me hungry.
Yeah, that's one of our go-tos.
Yeah. So yeah, don't worry about it, man. You don't need to do all that stuff. Now, if you got overweight somehow, and then we can talk about that. But
but even then, with a guy with his body type, he probably nutrient times for a month, and it's
back to where he needs to go, right? Yeah. So so don't worry so much about that, man. Just hit the protein.
Yeah.
Hit the carb. Hit some high quality carbohydrate.
Stay away from the beers.
Yeah, and you'll put on some muscle mass that way.
Quality stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Guys, that's it. We love answering these questions. We love talking about them. So if you guys have any more, whether it's jiu-jitsu, medical, whatever, shoot us an email, grapplingwithpodcast@gmail.com.
Hope that helps everyone.
Yeah. We'll see you on the net.
Later.